Okay, so we're going to build the front end in this part. Again, if you do want to just skip to the back end, if you have front end knowledge or you literally just want to build your own design, go ahead and do that and join me in the next part. But in this part, we're going to be building up the front end. We're going to be adding our fonts from our Google Fonts API. We'll have two, Open Sans and Shadow into Light 2, but I'll show you how to use them as well. We'll create and we'll hook in a style sheet. We'll add our meta viewport so that this will work nicely across all devices. And then we'll start to mark out our actual list, the form as well, and define where that's going to be submitted through to. It sounds like a lot to do, but there isn't actually that much to do, so don't worry too much. So I've created one file. This is an empty file inside PHP to do, and I have this open in my browser here. Currently, that's obviously just a blank file. So we've just got an empty index.php file. You're going to need to name it PHP because we'll be doing some querying within this at the very top, and then we'll have our view, if you like, at the bottom. So I'm using Emmet to expand out tags like HTML5 or shortcuts like HTML5, but obviously feel free to just follow along and type what I am. We have an HTML5 doc type, HTML head and body tags, so what you'd normally expect, and a character encoding tag here. Let's give this a title of to do. And inside of here, we're going to want to link in, first of all, Google Font Style Sheet. So we have one for Open Sans and one for Shadow into Light 2, which is the sort of handwritten font. And then we'll pull in our main.css style sheet. So let's pull in our Google fonts first. So I've got Open Sans just open here. Just Google for these and they'll come up. So Google for Open Sans, Google Fonts. And then I'm going to open this in Google Fonts and this will allow me to use it. Now I'm only using the normal 400, so I don't need to select any other options here. That's going to have an impact on page load speed. And I don't need any additional character sets either. So here, basically, this says number 3, add this code to your website. I don't like how this is formatted out. It's using single quotes and it's using the redundant type attribute. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste this into here. I'm going to remove the type attribute and I'm just going to change these single quotes here to double quotes. Of course, you can define and replace. That might be a little bit quicker, but there we go. So we've got that in there now. So we've got our first font in. Let's just duplicate this down so we can then go ahead and add in our shadows into light 2. So we hit this, there we go, and we've got sort of only one option for this. And here we can go down and we can basically copy and paste this. And what I'm going to do is just go ahead and grab this here. And I'm going to go ahead and paste that into there, like so. Okay, so now that we've linked in our Google Fonts, we can use these from within our main style sheet. So let's do this now. Inside of href, we're going to link to CSS main.css. So that obviously doesn't exist yet. So let's create this here. So we create a new folder here called CSS. And then within this, I'm going to create a new file. And this is just going to be called main.css. And this is where all of our styles for our entire application are going to go. Okay, so now we need a viewport tag here. So again, if you don't have Emmet, you will just do a meta. The name attribute is viewport, just to describe what this meta tag is. And the content here, you need a width to be the device width, so that just sets the width of the viewport. User scalable, I'm going to get rid of because I want them to be able to scale it. We've got an initial scale of 1, which means it's not neither zoomed in or zoomed out. And I'm going to get rid of the maximum and minimum scale here, so we can allow our users to sort of pinch in if they want to. So that's pretty much it for the head, all the boring stuff out of the way. Now what we're going to do is we're going to create the list, the header for the list, the items, and we'll put a couple of fake items in there while we style things up. So I'm going to switch away from using Emmet now. If you're sort of learning HTML, that might be a little bit easier. So we're going to create a div, which is just a generic container, and the class of this is going to be list, just so we can specifically target things within this list. You don't have to do this, but it's probably wise. So we're going to create an h1 element, and here I'm going to give this a class of header, like so. And then in here, I'm going to say to do. So I'm going to move down now, and inside of here, I'm going to actually create the items, and we're going to put these in an unordered list, because technically this is just an unordered list. Unless you're going to add to this and have priorities, this is probably the best markup for this. So we create an unordered list here. Then within this, we have list items. So these are LIs. So UL is unordered list, LI is list item. So what we can actually do is we can add the item in here within a span, and you'll find out why we do this later. And this is going to have a class of item. And we're also going to have a modifier here, which is going to be additional class, which is when this item is done. If it is done, we're going to have a strike through put through it. So we can add that in a little bit later. So in actual fact, let's duplicate this down and have one item that's not done and one item that is done. So I'll just say something like pick up shopping, and something like learn PHP. Okay, so what we need now is a down here a form that basically allows users to add a new item. So here we create a form with an action, and this action is going to be add.php. That's basically where the form is going to be submitted through, and all the variables within the form, so like the actual item we're adding, is sent through to PHP so we can pick it up. So we have a method here, post, and we'll end the form just there. So inside of here, in fact, let's give this a class so we can specifically target this. This is more than likely going to look different to items that we have on our page, other items. So here we're going to have an input type, and this is just going to be text. It's just going to be text that user can enter. This is the name of the item that they're adding. So the name here is going to be name. That's a little bit confusing. This could be name item. This is the name of the item. So I'm going to have a placeholder in here, and this isn't the best solution, because if placeholder isn't supported by a browser, the user is just going to be left with a blank space that they sort of have to guess that this is where they're going to add something. So you might want to look at sort of a placeholder fallback or some other solution. But for now, this is okay. It's not the worst solution in the world. So we're going to have a class here of input, because we want to know what to target within this form. And I'm also going to set autocomplete to off, just so it doesn't suggest items as we're typing. And I'm going to set this to be required. And what that'll do is it will bring up the you must enter this or fill in this field text that we saw in the demo in the last part. So to finish this off, we're going to have an input type here of submit, and this is going to have a value of add. So this is going to be at the bottom, the button at the bottom, which will allow you to click and actually add the item, essentially just submitting the form. And then we have a class of submit. So let's take a look at this in the browser. At the moment, it doesn't look great, but we can see that the structures here, we've got the header, we've got the items, and we've got the input and the button to actually submit the form. It doesn't look great, but that's where our CSS comes in. So inside of main.css, we need to go ahead and change a few things here. I'm going to first of all set the background color of the body. So we're going to say background color, and this is going to be ECEFF0, which is a light gray. You can go ahead and use your own color scheme if you want, but this is a really nice sort of gray color to be using. And we're going to change the body and the input, and if you're using a text area or anywhere, this would apply to that too. We're going to set the font. So we're going to say font at 1M. This is the shorthand font property. So we're setting all of these on 1. Otherwise, you would do something like font size and font family, but we're just doing it all in one here. And we're going to choose Open Sans. So that will make use of the Google font that we pulled in a moment ago. And this is going to be a sans serif. So a sans serif fallback if Open Sans can't be loaded. And here we're going to give this a color. So for the sort of whole page, we're going to say 363639. I think I got this color scheme just off Adobe Cooler, which is a really cool way to grab a nice color scheme. So what we're also going to do is for all anchors, we're going to set the text decoration to none, and we're going to set the border bottom to 1 pixel dashed, and then the same color as our body font. Now this isn't an ideal solution if you're applying these styles to your entire website. Maybe just the to-do list is part of your website. But in essence, this is just going to remove the default underline of the links, and it's going to add in instead a 1 pixel dashed border of the same color. We don't have any links at the moment, but what we could do is we could just add one in to see how this looks. So let's just say click me. There we go. So that's how it looks. It's got that dashed underline there. And that's mainly for the mark done buttons that we're going to be creating. But you don't really have to do this. It's entirely up to you. So let's create the stars for the actual list now. So this is the container of the list. So I'm going to create this as a sort of self-contained container. It's going to have a maximum width of 500 pixels, but you could of course have this within other elements. So in this case, you wouldn't use these. Let's just go ahead and set the background color first of all to white. And this will obviously contrast with what we've got in the background. So there we go. We've got a nice white background to that. And let's set a margin to 20 pixels, and also what this is going to do is it's going to center this container when we start to add our widths on. This basically means 20 pixels at the top and bottom, and also at left and right, which will center an item which has a width less than 100%. So in here we're going to say 100% width, but then we're going to define a maximum width of 500 pixels. What this will do is it means that if the browser window is made smaller than 500 pixels, this will sort of become almost responsive. So when I pull this in, you can see that as I pull that in, it's not chopping off, it's just pulling everything in. So that's the reason that we do that. Okay, so for the rest of the stars here, we're going to give this a padding of 20 pixels. That just means then that this pushes sort of the elements within away from the very edge. But you'll notice that that actually grew in size. If we do inspect this, we can see that the list is, if we just check it, you can see the green part here is the padding. The orange is just sort of the margin, the natural margin around the outside. Now if I get rid of the padding, you can see that the size of the container increases and decreases. And for that reason, we're going to set box sizing to border box. And what that will do is it will alter the box model to mean that the padding doesn't affect the overall size and height of that element. Okay, so just to finish off, let's give this a border radius of 2 pixels, and let's give well, that just rounds off the corners very slightly. If we just zoom in, you can see that the corners are very, very slightly rounded now. Depending on your monitor contrast, this might not be visible. I'm not sure. I've chosen the best colors for that. But let's add a box shadow now. This just adds a shadow to an element. We have an X and Y offset, we have a spread, and then we have a color. In this case, I'm going to use the RGBA function, and I'm going to set this to black with an alpha channel of 0.1. Okay, so next thing to do is to style the header. So we're going to say list.header, so at the header within the list. We're going to change the font family to the one that we pulled in from Google Fonts, which was shadows into light 2, and then we set the fallback to cursive. Okay, so now we're going to set a margin here of 0, 0, 0, 0, just to sort of give our north, east, south, and west values. And then all we want to do is on the bottom add a 10 pixel margin, and that will just move that so it sits nicely at the top with the padding we've already given it. But if we inspect this, you can see that the orange part is the padding on the bottom, or the margin on the bottom rather. So we've got our header sorted. Let's now go ahead and list our items. So let's just pull this down a little bit. But first of all, let's just reset the items container. So we're going to say margin 0. This is basically the unordered list. We're going to say padding 0, and we're going to say list style type is none. I don't actually know if I gave the unordered list a class. No, I didn't. So this is a class of items. Now what that's going to do is it's going to get rid of the default margin and the padding on an unordered list. And it's also going to get rid of, by using list star type none, it's going to get rid of them bullets. So you can now see it just looks like text sat underneath each other, but we've still got the semantic benefit of having an unordered list here. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we have, let's just take a look at the markup here. We should have an item like a done button or something like that, which we haven't added into here. We've got a span, but after the span, what we can actually do here down here as well, if we just pull this down. So this one is done, so we can use this class sort of hooked onto here to cross this out. If an item isn't done, we want an anchor in here, and we want this to say mark as done. And then this is going to link off to somewhere. We know that's going to link off to like done.php with all the information that we need. But this is going to have a class of done button. Class done hyphen button. And what that means is we can say items done button. And we can style this to look like a nice little button. So what we actually want here is we want, let's just have a look. In fact, let's group this under its own heading. So we'll say done button. And we'll say done button here. Right, so let's style this up and then we'll look at positioning and things like that of these items. So marker's done. At the moment, it just looks like a normal link. It's got the normal, the sort of default colors on there, and it's got the underline that we gave it earlier. So we want this to be a display of inline block. That means that we can style this like a block element, but it's going to sit in line. We're going to change the font size. We want that to be 0.8 em, or you could do 0.8 em, but it's entirely up to you. And we want the background color here to change. And we're going to have this as D9DFE1, which is like a slate grey type color, like a light slate grey color. And we're going to change the actual color of this as well. So we say color, and we'll set this to probably sensible to the same color as the body, like so. Obviously make sure we have our hash in there. Okay, so now what we're going to do is add a little bit of padding, because at the moment things look a little bit tight. So again, I'm doing 3 pixels on the top and the bottom, 6 on the left and the right. So it now looks like this, quite nice. And we're going to set the border here to 0. And we're going to set the opacity to 0.4. Now the reason that we're doing this is when we hover over each item, we want the opacity to change to 1, which is basically how opaque it is. And then this will allow us to sort of not see this as much as we glance down the page. We don't want them all looking too prominent. So let's style up the items now. So each of the items in this list. So down here we can say items.item. In fact, no, let's say items li. So we'll style each of the list items. And while we're doing that, we also want the input to be styled along with it. So we want item add input to look exactly the same as the items we already have. So we want this input here to look like each one of these. Okay, so we'll set the border to 0. We'll set the border on the bottom to 1 pixel dashed and hash CCC. And we'll set the padding here to 15 pixels 0. So now we have the following. So that already looks a little bit nicer. We've got the input, like I said here, looking pretty much the same as these items here, except we've got this add button. We'll style that in a moment to have it underneath here. And it looks fine. Now we've got this problem where when we click in, we've got this blue border around it. You can, of course, keep that. It does aid, some sort of usability. However, what we are going to do is we're going to get rid of this. So we're basically going to say input, focus, outline, none, like that. And there we go. When we click in it, we don't get that outline. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's just focus on done items, because this one should be done. All we need to do in this case is we need to say items.item.done. So this is item that has a class of done as well inside the items here needs to have a text decoration of line through. Line through. And there we go. So that's a done item, and we'll control that with PHP later. So the last thing to do in terms of the items is when I hover over one of these items, I want this mark as done button to change opacity 1. We could do this with JavaScript, but it's easily done with CSS and obviously a lot quicker as well. So we're going to say for each item that we hover over, so each list item that we hover over, we want to style the done button, and we're going to set the opacity to 1. So when we hover over a list item, the done button changes its value on opacity to 1. So there we go. When I hover over, that's done, like so. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is we want to set the input. We've already used input down here. We want to set the input to a width of 100%. Now what that's going to do is, because at the moment this is only sort of half of this width, that's going to push that add button down, and it's also going to pull the input all the way over to the edge. So when we type lots of stuff here, all that really happens is we just get this effect. You could of course use a text area. It's entirely up to you and style that differently, but I've just used an input here to keep everything on the same line. So let's style the submit button here. So let's go down and style the submit button. Okay, so submit. This could be named slightly differently. It's a little bit generic, and if you are including other elements on your page, this probably is a little bit too generic, but that's okay. You can change the class names to suit you. So we're going to set a background color on this to FFF, so that's just white. We're going to set a bit of padding, so 5 pixel on the top, 10 on the left and the right. We're going to set a border here of 1 pixel solid DDD. So let's just check how this is looking. Cool, looks a little bit better. But what we're going to do is we're going to set a width of 100% here. And we're then going to say we want a margin top of 10 pixels. And let's refer back to this. Cool, so it's looking a little bit nicer now. We can click this and we get our front end validation because we added our required attribute on here. But I want to add a little bit of a shadow on this, so I'm going to set a box shadow on here of 3 pixels left offset, or X offset rather, sorry, 3 pixels Y offset, 0 and DDD. We should get like this. So that's the front end of our to-do. Let's now move on to the back end and making this actually work.